We don't use the term specialty coffee.
Excellent.
We've dropped it pretty much because, like, I wrote an article a little while ago, one of the only ones that I ever wrote, but like it was the death of specialty coffee. And the basic premise to me is I just saw specialty, the word, in every coffee roaster, around town. And I was like, what is it? What does it mean? Because I just don't understand that word. There isn't any specialty coffee police out there, and I think people were just using the word. And that shouldn't be from my definition. Like, to me, specialty really does mean an approach. It means a reward for the producer. It means, I suppose, people working together to really, showcase what coffee can be. The point system to me was like 80 points. Like, I don't buy 80-point coffee.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of specialty coffee out there that's, definitely under my 80 point.
The introduction to regenerative coffee farming workshops are now available on demand in English, Spanish and Portuguese. For coffee producers, the workshop is available for just $10, and for everyone else it's $20. Led by our incredible professors, the workshop is packed with practical knowledge and strategies to help coffee farmers and the entire coffee industry adapt to the challenges of climate change, rising costs and market demands. If you're a business owner, this workshop is a great and affordable way to inform your employees about the challenges ahead while also supporting Mapper Forward. Head to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the description to purchase the on-demand version and start your journey towards a more sustainable coffee future today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new series of a guest that I'm very, very excited to have back on the podcast for the first time in a lot of years. Welcome back to the podcast, Mark Dundon.
Thank you, Lee. It's great to be here.
Folks, I need to say something before we start. Everybody in their career needs to meet someone at a specific time in their career that's going to tell them, go this way, go that way, think about this, think about that. And sometimes they're doing that before you meet them, and then you do meet them and they continue to do that. Mark Dundon is that person for me. Mark's too humble to ever accept any of that kind of praise, but Mark really changed my career when it came to the way that I thought about him. And George Howe were the two people that made me think differently about the coffee industry. And Mark was there in Los Angeles. Mark and Lisa, his partner, were there in Los Angeles at the same time that I was building Elixir, and I was going through a fucking terrible time. And Mark was my person where I was able to go to him and say, nothing makes sense. Help me understand. He was the person who had walked the path in business before I walked the path in business. And it's always meant so much to me that Mark was that person who kind of was in my path. And my wish for everybody is that you find your Mark Dundon that has done in business before you what you want to do and is gracious enough to say to you, hey, kid, what the fuck are you doing? And that was Mark for me. So in this series,
thank you.
We're going to talk about, you're welcome. It really did change everything for me during that time. So anyway, in this series, the theme that we're going to talk about is the difference opening a cafe today versus pre-2020. And Mark, I don't know if people realize how different it is being in opening cafes post-COVID versus pre-COVID. Now, do you want to just give people a bit of a background? I'm sure that there's nobody that doesn't know who you are, but give people a bit of a background because you just opened a brand new cafe and they may not know the scope of what you've done.
Well, I suppose I started, a long time ago, like it was around the 2000 mark, and I opened a very small cafe in a very small suburb in Melbourne. It was built by my friends and myself, and it was really just a passion project, I suppose, which is sort of indicative of that coffee time.
Mm,
There wasn't a huge amount of equipment put in. It was very basic, but it was, appreciated by the locals. It was it was service model orientated. It was about the local community, and it sort of took off, which was great. I really enjoyed the process of that small cafe. That really set me with a buzz for hospitality, I suppose. I'd been
mm.
in hospitality before for a couple of years. I went to art school and then worked out that art school and, exhibiting and things like that was great, but it wasn't going to make me too much cash. So my wife was pregnant. We were having a kid. I needed to, try and, pay the rent. And so that's when I got into, a small bar, which was great, but, alcohol wasn't such a great, thing for my lifestyle. So I moved into coffee, with that small cafe in Brunswick in Melbourne. I really enjoyed that process. Like the coffee side of things, I didn't quite understand. Like I was getting these bags of coffee. There was no dates, and I didn't get any information realistically. It was like, just, use the silver bag. It's all going to be cool. And unfortunately, I'm a little bit more sort of curious than that. So I delved deeper and deeper and deeper. And then I eventually found out that I really needed to go and work on this. Really needed to work on coffee. So I sold that cafe and I started a place in South Melbourne called St. Ali, which is, quite big now, and worked at that for a few years. And that was sort of, roasting, doing beverages, all that sort of stuff. It was a really great time. I really enjoyed working in that sort of environment. So me, it just really made things, um, made me understand coffee. It made me understand, the other side of
Mm.
coffee, which I didn't really know. I went to, the US. I traveled to Origin to really look at, aspects of how you cup, how you taste, what the right things, to look for, and, buying coffee and all that sort of stuff. So it was a really important time for me to really, just gather information and really enjoy that process as well. Like, it was fantastic, traveling, meeting people and doing all that sort of stuff. I sold that after a few years, for just a couple of reasons. I just wanted to do somewhere a little bit bigger that had green storage and that sort of stuff. And that's when I set up Seven Seeds. And I set that up with a manager of mine, which was at Sonali, called Bridget. And I suppose we've been partners ever since for
Mhm.
perhaps 18 years, doing multiple venues, but roasting as Seven Seeds. And yeah, so that's it pretty much in a nutshell.
And folks, to give you some reference, at the time, so 20 years ago, 22 years ago, I joined the coffee industry out of the corporate world. And back then, specialty wasn't even the word that we were really using to talk about what we were doing. And on came this brand, St. Ali, that was open. I was working in Sydney, and this place in Melbourne opened, St. Ali, and I was working at Campos at the time. And all of the baristas I was working with had gone and visited St. Ali and said, you got to go and check this place out. And this became kind of the place that really was that moment for the coffee industry in Australia that said, let's go. And like, I've got chills just thinking about it. Go ahead, Mark.
The staff came to me one day and said, there's a dude out there who's just had 5 espresos. And I poked my head around the corner. That was Dion from Single O. So it was
No
really
shit.
interesting. Yeah. But it was a great time. The industry in that time was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of...
Yeah, exciting.
Yeah, it was. It was good. Yeah.
Well, and I watched you guys, like, at that time, you and Paul from Mecca. Shout out to
Yeah.
Paul. I really got to get
Yeah.
Paul back on the podcast again.
Got to get Paul back on.
Yeah. But there were a group of you that were like buying coffee together. You were going to Origin together, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was a very exciting time. And you guys were setting an example for the next generation of business owners that was all about that. No?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Like, it was a very small world, the coffee world. Like, we knew, the players in the US, we still, and it's still to a certain extent is a fairly small world. There's not as many of the, I suppose, recent, coffee roasters traveling to Origin as much and things like that.
Hmm.
Whereas, you would definitely travel and you would, turn up somewhere and there everyone was wearing stumped down t-shirts,
Yes.
Dwayne had been in there.
Or intelligentsia.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a bit, but and like, Jeff and I are really close friends and all that sort of stuff.
Shout out to Jeff.
It was a great time to be in coffee. Um,
Mm.
and it was sort of an open door, like you could turn up, and talk to people and do all that sort of stuff. It was quite cool.
And here we are in 2025. You've opened up a bakery
Yep.
called Suburbia.
Yeah.
And Seven Seeds is known all over the world. You, for the entirety of what I can remember of your career, you have been talking about the farmer. You have been talking about doing good business. You guys release an impact report every year that is available to your customers. It was the first impact report I read that I found useful
Okay. Yep.
when you handed it to me. And we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff in this series, folks, because 2025 really is a different beast in coffee. But you opened Suburbia this year, just
Yeah.
like a couple of weeks ago. And in this episode, I want to ask you, we're going to have a conversation about what specialty coffee is today. And I think that that's kind of relevant in a year like 2025 with the volatility that we've got, given where St. Ali started and where you're at now with opening cafes. How are you and your team, how are you guys looking at and defining specialty coffee today?
Okay, well, yeah, it's a very interesting question. Like with this new cafe, I think one of the main things that's fairly poignant is that it's reactive. So in other words, it's
Hmm.
reacting to an environment. Like it's the first time we've really constructed a cafe bakery based on solving a lot of problems. So in other words, when I did Sonali, I suppose it was solving problems, but there was a euphoria to just learn,
Yeah.
and get into stuff. Whereas this is more like, okay, we couldn't get pastries during COVID. We have to do our pastries. We can't
Mm.
really, like the business model won't allow this type of service. We have to change that. So it's a very, I suppose, considered environment in that space to really look at, I suppose a lot of the problems that have come through this last, 5 years and looking forward. Um,
Mm.
so that's probably the difference to our other cafes, looking at, big 50-seater, 60-seater cafe, it makes, yeah, like in Melbourne, um, costs, wages and things like that, are making that difficult to really pull off, Um, People want to have, a price point where they can actually come in, um, daily, if not daily, a couple of days a week. And if prices just get too high, it doesn't have that same sort of frequency. So, this cafe and this approach is, I suppose, looking at those, I suppose, fundamentals that are causing people not to drink as much coffee or, you know, come into a cafe.
Mm. And when you guys are looking at specialty coffee today, do you think you define specialty different today than you did, let's
We
say, when
don't
you
use
opened Senna Seeds? Go ahead.
we don't use the term. We don't use the term specialty coffee.
Excellent.
We've dropped it pretty much because, like, I wrote an article a little while ago, one of the only ones that I ever wrote, but like, it was the death of specialty coffee. And the basic premise to me is I just saw specialty, the word, in every coffee roaster, around
Mhm.
town. And I was like, what is it? What does it mean? Because I just don't understand that word. Um, there isn't any specialty coffee police out there, and I think people were just using the word. Um, when that shouldn't be from my definition. Like to me, specialty really does mean an approach. It means a reward for the producer. It means, I suppose people working together to really, showcase what coffee can be. Um, the point system to me was like 80 points. Like, I don't buy 80-point coffee. Um, you know,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of specialty coffee out there that's, definitely under my 80-point, scoring. It might not be everyone's scoring, but I think therein lies a lot of the issues with that sort of terminology. I want to be comfortable. I want to see people showcase, what coffee can do, and I think there's a lot of people who can do that. And I think, we're in such an exciting phase with coffee, with, all these different varietals being taken around the world. It really is only just starting to see processing, um, in more of a little bit of a scientific matter where it's controlled,
Hmm.
like when you look at, old school, fermentation technique on a farm for a washed coffee, it just went into the pit, and sat there overnight, or when the stick, stood upright in,
Hmm.
the green coffee. So, looking at that approach, it's exciting times for coffee. Obviously, very interesting with co-ferments and things like that. But for me, specialty coffee, yeah, I just don't use the term.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, and from everything that I've observed about going to your cafes, your approach to coffee, whether we give it the name specialty coffee or not, it's definitely not the. It's a commercial endeavor.
Yeah,
What you're
yeah,
doing is a business. It
yeah,
is your cafes are always very busy, but I guess the idea of specialty or using the term specialty was to say this is a different kind of commercial experience than the commodity side of cheap coffee, right? And you
yeah.
absolutely get that experience from your cafes. So, so if we're looking at that, if I understand it correctly, you take a holistic approach, you and Bridget and your team, to defining what the experience is for the consumer as well as for your stakeholders.
Yeah, like I think, trying to be transparent with, our producers and things like that. Like that's the only thing that's real to a certain extent. Like, like
Wow.
when we looked at, specialty coffee and that terminology and the way people were using language, the only thing we could really think about was, okay, well, let's just, open up what we do so people can see for themselves. And hopefully other people do that. Hopefully other people, show what they pay for coffee. And like, yeah, like, coffee is very diverse. I have the whole idea for my coffee format is to really look at what I really enjoy and what my staff really enjoy, and look at the boundaries of coffee as well. Like, we all have
Mm,
coffees that sit where we think just inside that, boundary at that level or here or whatever, because we want people to experience, the full breadth of it. Um, but I don't really want to do co-ferments. I think, that's a little bit of an old school thing for me. I don't really want to add, a sugary thing to beverages or whatever. I see putting fruit or anything like that in the co-ferment as just a flavoring to a certain extent. And the real thing that worries me is if you can really do it to taste like, 1900 meter, grown coffee that someone
mm.
spent a lot of time, it doesn't produce a lot of, beans up there. If you can mimic that, um, that concerns me, because, people aren't going to grow that coffee up there. That real
Right.
taste format that comes from that particular spot is going to be artificially done. I don't want to see that to a certain extent. Like whether the consumer can see that or not, is another question, but I don't want to see that.
It's not the consumer's job, right? It's our job as the people that are choosing the consumer's experience to curate that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think it's hard you can't totally ignore the consumer. Obviously, the market is being driven in a certain way and things like that. But I think
Hmm.
it's important to really look at the boundaries that you put on, you know, what you're doing. Um, that could be confusing, but like what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that, um, matcha and things like that coming onto the menu is unavoidable to a certain extent in this day and age. Like people want a diversity. There's a younger generation that really, really likes drinking coffee, but it's a different sort of coffee to what we have. But it's fully displayed clearly about what it is. And I think that's really important to talk about. But is to get these, people interested in coffee, at a higher level in regards to something that's grown, that's delicious. People, I think, need to be educated a little bit about what is great. Your first taste of whiskey probably isn't the greatest experience, but if you give time and you actually experience what's happening with these more, I suppose, specialty products and things like that, it does take a little bit of time to really discern some of those flavor profiles. And I think it's our job really to lead people into, coffee. And a lot of these beverages and things like that, I think, are a vehicle to do that. Gateway drug, so to speak.
Word. As we wrap up this episode, the question that I have is, if you don't use the term specialty coffee, how would you describe the coffee that you serve at Seven Seeds and the rest of the cafes associated?
But for me, it's fairly simple. It's curated coffee by
I love that.
Seven Seed,
Yeah, okay.
And you can check the books, you can check it out, but this is curated by us.
I love it. The first time I ever saw anybody really approach transparency with any sort of seriousness was I was sitting at Brother Bubba Boudin, and one of your baristas came up to me and he handed me the bag of coffee and he said, "You can read all the pricing on the back of the bag."
Oh, yeah.
And you guys had the price that you had paid, the farm gate, right? And I said to him, "What is this supposed to tell me?" And he said, "Well, at the very least, it should show you we've got nothing to hide."
That's nice to know.
Boy, did that blow my mind. So
a lot of people are critical, with some origins like Kenya, like there's a lot, some systems or whatever. But for us, we want to be as transparent as we can up to that point where, we can't trace it any further. And to tell people about that we can't go any further with this particular coffee or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, folks, in the next episode, we're going to talk about how was opening Suburbia, their new cafe, different from the projects that were open before 2020. So join us for the next episode. Peace, love and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.